Good evening, everyone. I'll stand on the existing protocols, and before I start, I have two things to say to David. The first is, I'm not Nigerian, although I've lived here for a few years. Where do I sign up? The second one is, I've got no problem pronouncing your name. David, right? Anyhow, I'd like to start by recognizing Pastor Paul. It's interesting, he often introduces me as his mentor, and as a matter of fact, he's mine. And he has been a teacher to me and a friend and a partner, and I am honored to have him in my life. I am also not surprised that he would open his house to you all tonight for an event like this. He is a Democrat, and he is a Nigerian, and he is a patriot. And it is his wish to see this country fulfill the greatness that David described so eloquently earlier. And this is our little contribution tonight to that process. So, Pastor Paul, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your welcoming us. So David, Your Majesty, I should say, welcome back to Nigeria. Welcome to Lagos. You have put your superb artistic talent in service to this country, to my country, and to the world in portraying a great American and indeed a world leader, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'd say that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message is particularly relevant in 2015 in the United States and in Nigeria. Thank you for bringing that message here to Lagos tonight. And to Carmen, thank you also for bringing Coretta Scott's King message to the screen and to Lagos. So we appreciate your presence. It is my honor and privilege to introduce my boss, Ambassador James Entwistle, who will set the stage for tonight's screening. The ambassador is one of our most senior diplomats in Africa and has held a variety of senior posts on the continent, in Asia, and in Washington. He arrived in Nigeria on October 28, 2013. And since then, he has tirelessly worked to strengthen relationships between the United States and Nigeria. In the last few months, Ambassador Entwistle has led U.S. efforts to support the electoral process, the democratic process in this country. Under his leadership, the United States has provided assistance to INEC, the Electoral Commission. We've engaged extensively with civil society, religious figures, and politicians, and have organized a large-scale observation effort for the upcoming elections now next month. 2 weeks ago today, the ambassador hosted Secretary of State John Kerry for discussion with Nigeria's principal presidential candidates. Ambassador Entwistle has been a dynamic champion for nonviolence, just like Dr. King, and has called repeatedly for peaceful elections. Tomorrow, in conjunction with Pastor Paul and a number of other religious leaders, he will host the two Lagos gubernatorial candidates at the signing of the Peace Pledge, and I'm very happy that one of those candidates is here this evening. Please help me welcome this great American and great friend of Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Good evening to all of you. Pastor Paul is undoubtedly used to speaking to audiences this big, but for me it's quite an experience. Thanks to Pastor Paul for letting us participate in this wonderful evening. Let me begin with my favorite Nigerian expression, which of course is all protocols observed. That way I don't forget anybody, I don't make any mistakes, all protocols observed. And it has been an honor to meet this evening David Oyelowo, and Carmen Ejogo, along with many others involved in the Nigerian film industry. And could I just note to everybody who's involved in the film industry that my son is a struggling actor in Chicago. So if you need to cast a skinny white kid, you know, have your people call my people. I'm joking. But my congratulations to everyone who's involved in the production of this timely film, the story of Dr. Martin Luther King. I know that many of Nigeria's economic, social, and spiritual leaders are here in the audience today, and we're delighted to be with you. This evening we gather to celebrate the legacy, as has already been said, of one of America and indeed the world's greatest historical figures, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., a leader who expanded the reach of American democracy to Americans of African descent. As has been said already, but let me reinforce, I think his message is especially timely as Nigerians prepare to go to the polls next month. For I believe that his legacy is tremendously relevant to your democratic experience. As we know, Dr. King rose to national prominence in 1955 after Rosa Parks, an African-American seamstress, refused to give up her seat to a white patron on a public bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Throughout 1955, Dr. King led the peaceful boycott of Montgomery buses. In the decade that followed, he became a leader and spokesperson for the civil rights movement as millions of people struggled peacefully for equal treatment in all aspects of American society. As you will soon see in this film, this was a dangerous time for Americans who advocated for racial equality in the American South in particular, but all over the United States. But Dr. King and courageous civil rights advocates persevered by placing black and white passengers on interstate buses, by sitting next to each other in segregated restaurants and at department store dining counters, and through programs to register black voters in southern states. Many were verbally abused and physically assaulted. Some of them were killed. Throughout this period, Dr. King nonetheless continued to advocate the practice of nonviolence. In his most famous speech, I Have a Dream, delivered in Washington, D.C. in August 1963, Dr. King offered a caution, which, while not one of the most well-known quotes from that famous speech, has always stuck with me. Dr. King said, and I quote, "But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force." End quotation. The next year, the Congress of the United States passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which guaranteed many of the rights to social equality that Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement had been fighting for, and Dr. King won the Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 35. Indeed, he was the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize until last year, when Malala won it at the age of 17. But Dr. King was not satisfied, since, although African Americans constituted more than half the population in some voting districts and were a large minority throughout the South, most of them had effectively been blocked from exercising their right to vote for over 100 years. Dr. King recognized that only through the ballot box could the voices and desires of African Americans truly be heard. When it became clear that despite President Lyndon Johnson's instruction to his Attorney General to draft the toughest Voting Rights Act possible, when it became clear that the U.S. Congress was reluctant to pass additional legislation so soon after the 1964 civil rights legislation, Dr. King responded. In March 1965, Dr. King undertook to lead a peaceful march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. As we shall soon see depicted on the screen, although the protesters were peaceful, many of the police and bystanders were violent. And as a direct result of these events, Congress took up and passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. At the White House signing ceremony of that bill, President Johnson remarked, and I quote, "The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by man for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison men because they are different from other men," end quote.